At my own award ceremony, the man I funded looked me in the eye and said, "You just write checks. I build the vision. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about." The ballroom in downtown Chicago was glowing with soft gold lights. Crystal glasses clinked. A giant screen behind the stage showed our company logo in bright silver. It was supposed to be a celebration of 12 years of hard work. Instead, it became the moment I understood exactly who Brennan Cade really was. I stood beside him on that stage, holding the award we had both been called up to receive. The host praised the company's explosive growth, our innovation, our leadership. Then he handed Brennan the microphone first. Brennan smiled the way he always does, confident, charming, perfectly rehearsed. He thanked the board, the employees, the partners. Then he glanced at me, paused for effect, and said with a laugh, "And of course, Alaric here made it possible. He writes the checks. I build the vision." The crowd chuckled. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. I felt heat rush up my neck. For a second, I thought maybe I misunderstood him. But then he kept talking about late nights he spent designing strategy, risks he took, sacrifices he made. I stood there like a background prop at my own company's ceremony. From my seat near the front, Maricela Rose stared at me. Her smile had faded. She knew that joke wasn't a joke. When the applause came, it sounded distant in my ears. I shook hands, posed for photos, and said nothing. That's what I've always done. I've always been the quiet one, the steady one, the man who handles contracts, funding rounds, and the details no one sees. But standing there, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just stage humor. Brennan wasn't sharing credit. He was rewriting history. After the ceremony, people crowded around him. Investors, board members, reporters. They praised his vision. I slipped away toward the hallway near the service entrance where it was quiet. Maricela found me there. "He meant that," she said softly. I nodded. Yeah, he did. The truth is, I had noticed the small changes over the years. Interviews where he said, "I founded this company." Press releases that left my name out. Meetings scheduled without me. I ignored it because I believed in what we built. But humiliation has a way of clearing your mind. That night, driving back to our condo, I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. If I was just the guy who writes checks, then Brennan had forgotten something very important. Those checks came with signatures. And those signatures came with control. I didn't say anything else about it that night. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I simply decided I was done being quiet. This story didn't begin on that stage. But that was the moment I stopped pretending. 12 years earlier, none of this looked glamorous. I first met Brennan Cade at a regional startup conference in Milwaukee. I wasn't even supposed to attend. A colleague had canceled, and I took his ticket. Brennan was speaking in a small breakout room with maybe 20 folding chairs. He didn't have a company yet. Just slides, big ideas, and a voice that filled the room. He talked about transforming mid-sized manufacturing firms with smarter logistics software. Most people in the room looked confused. I didn't. I saw potential. Not just in the idea, but in him. After his talk, I introduced myself. I told him my name was Alaric Vaughn and that I had experience structuring early-stage ventures. He didn't recognize my last name, which I appreciated. My father had built a regional banking network, and I had recently inherited enough capital to invest wisely, if I chose the right project. We talked for 3 hours at a quiet coffee shop across the street. Brennan had ambition. He had vision. What he didn't have was structure. No legal framework. No funding plan. No operational timeline. That's where I came in. Within 6 months, we incorporated. I funded the seed round personally. I drafted partnership agreements with the help of attorneys I trusted. I insisted on clear equity splits and protective voting rights. Brennan laughed back then and said, "You really think ahead." I did. Our first office wasn't an office at all. It was an empty warehouse space with 2 borrowed desks and a folding table. Winters were brutal. We wore coats inside because we couldn't afford proper heating. I handled investor calls in my car for privacy. Brennan worked on product prototypes late into the night. We were different, but it worked. He thrived in front of people. He could sell possibility like it was already real. I stayed behind the scenes, building contracts, negotiating vendor terms, managing payroll when we could barely meet it. When we hired our first employee, Keaton Mireles, he thanked Brennan for the opportunity. Brennan clapped him on the back. I processed the paperwork and transferred the salary deposit. That was always our rhythm. As the company grew, so did Brennan's public presence. He became the face of innovation panels. He gave keynote speeches. He was quoted in business magazines. When reporters asked about leadership, he said, "We've built something special." I never needed applause. I believed foundations mattered more than spotlight. Every funding round was structured carefully. Every contract protected our long-term stability. I made sure we never expanded beyond what cash flow could support. Brennan once told me, "You're the architect. I'm the artist." At the time, it sounded like respect. Looking back, I wonder when that balance started to tilt. Maybe it was when investors began addressing emails only to him. Maybe it was when conference invitations stopped including my name. Or maybe the imbalance was always there, and I just didn't notice because I trusted him. Back then, though, we were partners. We celebrated small wins with cheap takeout and warm soda. We believed we were building something that would outlast both of us. If I had known how that story would bend, I might have read those early contracts twice as carefully. Success didn't come overnight, but when it came fast. By year 5, we had moved into a real office in downtown Chicago. Glass walls, branded signage, a staff of almost 50 people. Investors started calling us instead of the other way around. Brennan thrived in that environment. Cameras loved him. Boards trusted him. Clients believed him. And slowly, I began to disappear. At first, it was small things. A trade magazine published a feature calling Brennan the founder and driving force behind the company. My name wasn't mentioned. I brushed it off. Reporters make mistakes. Then it happened again. At a logistics summit in Denver, Brennan gave a keynote speech about how I built this company from scratch. I was sitting in the third row. He didn't correct himself. He didn't glance in my direction. Afterward, people shook his hand and congratulated him. A few glanced at my badge and asked if I worked in finance. In finance, I told myself it didn't matter. Titles didn't matter. Recognition didn't matter. The company was growing, and that was what counted. But the pattern continued. Board meetings started being scheduled during times I had conflicts, without checking my availability. Brennan began holding strategy sessions with certain board members, including Delaney Rourke, without looping me in. When I asked about it, he'd smile and say, "Just informal brainstorming. Nothing big." Except decisions started coming out of those informal talks. New marketing campaigns. Aggressive expansion plans. Public messaging that framed him as the sole visionary. One evening, Maricela sat across from me at our kitchen table, reading an article on her tablet. "They called him the founder again," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. "You built the structure," she continued. "You designed the ownership model. Why are you letting this happen?" "Because I believed in loyalty. Because I thought partnership meant trust. Because I didn't want to look insecure. That was my mistake." The deeper issue wasn't just publicity. It was paperwork. One afternoon, I reviewed a draft investor presentation and noticed language describing equity in a way that subtly minimized preferred voting rights. My rights. I corrected it immediately and sent it back. Brennan replied with a casual, "Good catch." Good catch. As if it had been an accident. Keaton began dropping by my office more often. He looked uneasy. "Some decisions feel rushed," he admitted once. "Expansion into Phoenix is moving fast." "Too fast?" I asked. He hesitated. "We're stretching." I started noticing how often my caution was described as hesitation. How my planning was labeled conservative. Brennan began saying things like, "We can't let fear slow us down." Fear. It was subtle, but it worked. People love boldness. They don't cheer for restraint. The night of the awards ceremony wasn't the first sign of erasure. It was just the first time Brennan said it out loud. "You just write checks." When I replayed those words in my head, I realized something painful. He truly believed it. The morning after the ceremony, I didn't go into the office right away. Instead, I sat in my home study with every original company document spread across my desk. Incorporation papers, shareholder agreements, early funding contracts, amendments over the years. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for clarity. For 12 years, I had trusted that structure would protect itself. But structure only protects you if you're willing to enforce it. I started with voting rights. When we first incorporated, I insisted on preferred shares in exchange for funding the seed round entirely myself. Brennan had common shares, valuable, but without the same control protections. At the time, he didn't care. He was focused on building product, not reading legal language. Now that language mattered. I called Theron Bellamy, our CFO, and asked him to meet privately. Theron had always been careful, methodical. He wasn't loyal to personalities, he was loyal to numbers. That's why I trusted him. We met in a quiet conference room that afternoon. I asked simple questions. Walk me through our current cash exposure. He pulled up spreadsheets. Expansion into 2 new markets had been funded aggressively. Revenue projections were optimistic, maybe too optimistic. Were these decisions board approved? I asked. He hesitated. Brennan said informal approval was enough for now. Formal vote later. That wasn't how governance worked. Not according to the bylaws I drafted. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't ego anymore. This was risk. Over the next week, I reviewed every major financial move from the past 18 months. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I just observed. Vendor contracts signed without full legal review. Marketing commitments exceeding approved budgets. Promised returns to investors that leaned heavily on best-case scenarios. None of it was criminal, but it was reckless. And reckless decisions under my name were unacceptable. One evening, Keaton stopped by my office after most staff had left. Are we okay? He asked quietly. Financially, I replied. He nodded. We're stable, I said. For now. That for now hung in the air. Brennan walked past the glass wall of my office at that moment. He didn't stop. He didn't knock. He was laughing with 2 board members about an upcoming partnership announcement. He looked confident, untouchable. What he didn't realize was that every aggressive move he made still ran through documents I had written years ago. Documents that required formal board oversight for specific financial thresholds. Thresholds he had crossed. That night, I went home and sat with Maricela on the balcony. You look different, she said. I'm not angry, I told her. I'm just done ignoring facts. She studied my face. What are you going to do? I looked out at the city lights. I'm going to remind everyone how this company was built. For the first time since the ceremony, I felt steady again. Not emotional. Not reactive. Prepared. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just reckless expansion. It was intentional positioning. Theron scheduled another quiet meeting with me late one Friday evening. The office was nearly empty, lights dimmed, cleaning crew moving through the halls. There's something else, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were notes from a private investor dinner Brennan had hosted 2 months earlier. I hadn't been invited. According to the summary, Brennan floated the idea of a future equity restructuring, one that would simplify leadership control and streamline decision-making. That sounded harmless on paper, until I read the next line. Potential dilution of early preferred shares to allow executive consolidation. My shares. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. He didn't have authority to promise that, I said quietly. He didn't promise, Theron replied carefully. He implied. Implied was sometimes worse. Over the next few days, small details surfaced. Brennan had referred to me as legacy capital in private conversations. Someone mentioned he once joked that I was more comfortable with spreadsheets than strategy. Legacy capital. Dead weight. That's what I had become in his narrative. Keaton came to my office again, closing the door behind him this time. I need to tell you something, he said. Brennan's been talking about reorganizing leadership after the next funding round. He says the company needs a single clear voice. I leaned back in my chair. Did he mention my role? Keaton didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. That night, Maricela confronted Brennan at a small dinner event hosted by one of the board members. I wasn't there, but she told me everything when she came home. She had asked him directly, "Why are you pushing Alaric aside?" Brennan had laughed lightly and said, "I'm not pushing him aside. He just prefers to stay behind the scenes." She pressed him. That's not the same thing. According to her, his expression changed. Not angry. Not defensive. Just dismissive. The company needs vision, he said. Not caution. When she told me that, something inside me finally settled into place. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't careless wording. Brennan wasn't forgetting my role. He was erasing it. And worse, he believed he deserved to. For years, I protected him. I smoothed over his impulsive promises. I secured the funding that made his bold moves possible. I absorbed risk quietly, so he could shine publicly. But now he was preparing to remove me from the foundation I built. That wasn't partnership. That was betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't call him. I didn't send an email demanding explanations. I stopped protecting him. The next Monday morning, I requested a formal board review citing fiduciary concerns. It was the first official step I had taken in 12 years without discussing it with Brennan first. And it wouldn't be the last. When the notice for the formal board review went out, the entire tone of the company shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just quiet tension. Calendar invites. Legal counsel copied on emails. Words like governance and compliance started appearing more often. Brennan came into my office that afternoon without knocking. "What's this about a review?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Standard oversight," I replied evenly. "We've crossed financial thresholds that require formal documentation." He leaned against the doorframe and smiled. "You could have talked to me first." "I am talking to you," I said. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear. Annoyance. "You're overreacting," he said. "Growth requires speed. Speed still requires structure." He exhaled sharply. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No," I said calmly. "I'm making it official." That was the end of the conversation. From that day forward, I stopped filling in the gaps for him. When vendors asked for confirmation on aggressive timelines, I deferred to formal approvals. When investors requested clarification, I directed them to documented projections rather than verbal promises. Theron compiled detailed financial summaries showing exposure risks if projected revenue missed targets. Nothing exaggerated. Just facts. Delaney Rourke, who had always aligned closely with Brennan, requested a private call with me. "I didn't realize the expansion commitments exceeded board-approved limits," she admitted. "They did," I said. "Why didn't you flag this sooner?" "Because I believed in partnership. Because I thought loyalty meant patience. But I didn't say that." "I'm flagging it now," I replied. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday in New York. Official agenda: Financial Oversight Review. Unofficially, everyone knew it was about leadership. The days leading up to it were quiet. Brennan avoided me except in group settings. His tone became sharper in meetings. He doubled down on optimism, presenting new partnership opportunities as if momentum alone could silence concern. Keaton stopped by my office the night before I flew out. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said carefully, "some of us know who built this place." I appreciated that more than he realized. That evening, alone in my hotel room in Manhattan, I reviewed the documents one last time. Early incorporation agreements. Preferred share clauses. Voting rights language Brennan once waved off as unnecessary. He had always assumed I wouldn't use them. But I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wasn't trying to humiliate him the way he humiliated me. I was protecting what we built. There's a difference between revenge and responsibility. I reminded myself of that as I closed my laptop. The next morning would determine everything. The boardroom overlooked the Manhattan skyline, all glass and steel and quiet power. 12 seats at the table. Coffee untouched. Legal counsel present. Brennan walked in confident, like he always did. Navy suit. Easy smile. He greeted everyone by name. When his eyes met mine, he gave a small nod, as if this were just another routine meeting. It wasn't. Delaney opened the session and asked me to begin the financial oversight review. I stood, connected my laptop to the screen, and started with numbers. Calmly. Clearly. Revenue projections versus actual performance. Expansion costs versus approved budgets. Contractual commitments made before formal votes. Every slide backed by documentation. Brennan interrupted halfway through. "We're in growth mode," he said lightly. "Short-term strain is normal." "It's not the strain," I replied. "It's the process." Theron then walked the board through exposure risks if projected partnerships were delayed. Nothing dramatic. Just reality. When I finished, the room was quiet. Brennan leaned back in his chair. "So what is this really about, Alaric?" he asked. "You're upset about a joke at an awards dinner?" A few board members shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't personal," I said evenly. "It's governance." He gave a short laugh. "You've always been cautious." "That's fine. But this company didn't grow because of caution." I let that sit for a second. Then I pulled up the final slide. Early shareholder agreement. Highlighted sections detailing preferred share control rights tied to capital investment and fiduciary safeguards. "When we incorporated," I said, We agreed that financial thresholds above certain limits required formal board approval and majority preferred shareholder consent. Brennan's expression tightened slightly. We crossed those limits, I continued. Multiple times. That's procedural, he said quickly. We can ratify retroactively. Not without acknowledging the breach. Delaney looked between us. Are you saying leadership acted outside its authority? Yes, I said simply. The room felt heavier. Brennan leaned forward now, no more smiling. You wouldn't have a company to protect if I hadn't built it. And you wouldn't have had the chance to build it without structure protecting it, I replied. Silence. Then I said the part he never expected to hear out loud. As majority preferred shareholder, I'm calling for a vote to review executive leadership under fiduciary compliance. He stared at me. Really stared. You're serious, he said quietly. I am. Legal counsel confirmed the motion was valid under our bylaws. For the first time in 12 years, Brennan didn't look untouchable. The vote wouldn't happen immediately. There would be discussion, deliberation. But the balance of power had shifted. And everyone in that room knew it. The discussion lasted nearly 2 hours. Some board members defended Brennan's aggressive growth strategy. Others questioned the lack of formal approval. It wasn't a shouting match. It was colder than that. Measured. Careful. Every word weighed. Brennan tried to regain control of the narrative. This is what leadership looks like, he said. Calculated risk. Bold movement. If we slow down every time paperwork lags behind opportunity, we lose. Delaney responded quietly. Paperwork is governance. Theron presented one final report outlining potential investor backlash if procedural breaches became public during due diligence for the next funding round. That shifted the mood. No one wanted instability tied to leadership. Finally, Delaney called for a closed vote on executive review. Brennan looked at me across the table. Not angry. Not yet. Just stunned. The ballots were simple. Continue current leadership without review, or initiate formal review pending compliance findings. One by one, votes were submitted. The legal counsel counted silently. When the result was announced, the air left the room. The board had voted to initiate formal review of Brennan's role as CEO. It wasn't immediate removal, but it was official investigation. Temporary oversight restrictions. No unilateral financial decisions. All executive actions subject to board approval until review concluded. For Brennan, that was a public fracture of authority. You blindsided me, he said once the others stepped out for a short recess. No, I answered calmly. I followed the agreement we both signed. He stood abruptly. After everything we built? Exactly, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. You could have handled this privately. I tried to handle concerns privately for years. That hit him harder than I expected. He stopped pacing. You're doing this because you're tired of standing in the background. I shook my head. I'm doing this because background doesn't mean powerless. For the first time, he didn't have a quick response. When the board reconvened, interim oversight measures were formally documented. Brennan remained CEO for now, but his authority was limited pending full findings. Outside the building, the Manhattan air felt sharp and cold. Maricela was waiting near the entrance. She searched my face the moment she saw me. It started, I told her. She nodded slowly. Are you okay? I thought about it. There was no rush of victory. No satisfaction. Just steadiness. Yes, I said. I am. Across the street, Brennan exited the building alone. No reporters. No applause. Just silence. For years, he believed vision alone made him untouchable. Now he was learning something else. Foundations don't argue loudly. They hold weight quietly. The formal review moved quickly once it began. With oversight restrictions in place, every major decision Brennan made required documented board approval. Emails that once ended with handled, now ended with pending review. That alone shifted how people saw him. Theron and external auditors combed through 18 months of financial decisions. Again, nothing criminal. But patterns emerged. Optimistic projections presented as near certainties, verbal commitments made before numbers supported them, strategic partnerships announced before contracts were fully secured. It wasn't fraud. It was ego moving faster than structure. 2 weeks into the review, the board called another meeting. This time, Brennan's confidence was thinner. He spoke carefully, choosing words with more restraint. But the damage wasn't just about numbers. It was about trust. Delaney summarized it plainly. Leadership isn't only vision. It's accountability. The final report recommended executive restructuring to restore investor confidence and reinforce governance compliance. Which meant one thing. A vote was called regarding Brennan's continuation as CEO. This time, there was no dramatic back and forth. The board had already seen enough. When the decision was announced, it was direct. Brennan would step down as CEO effective immediately. He would retain minority equity, but transition to an advisory role during a short handover period. He didn't argue. He looked at me instead. "So this is how it ends?" he asked quietly. "It didn't have to," I replied. He gave a hollow laugh. "You always cared more about control than credit." "That's not true," I said. "I cared about stability." For a moment, I saw something real in his expression. Not arrogance. Not anger. Regret. But regret doesn't undo momentum. He gathered his folder and walked out of the boardroom without another word. The hallway felt strangely empty afterward. Keaton was appointed interim operational lead under direct board supervision. I declined the CEO position when it was offered. That surprised people. "You have the authority," Delaney said. "I prefer building systems," I answered. Over the next months, we restructured approval processes. Transparent reporting. Clear decision thresholds. No more informal agreements floating above written contracts. The company stabilized. Investors responded positively to the strengthened governance. Growth slowed slightly, but it became sustainable. One evening, I stood alone in the office long after everyone left. The skyline reflected off the glass walls. I thought about the early warehouse days. Cheap takeout. Shared ambition. The version of Brennan who once thanked me for believing in him. Losing a business partner is one thing. Losing a friend is heavier. Maricela joined me later, slipping her hand into mine. "You didn't destroy him," she said softly. "I didn't try to. You just stopped letting him erase you." That was true. And sometimes that's enough. A year passed faster than I expected. The company looked different now. Not in branding or office space, but in tone. Meetings were deliberate. Forecasts were realistic. Decisions were documented. There was less applause, maybe, but more stability. Keaton stepped fully into the operational leadership role. He wasn't flashy. He didn't give dramatic speeches. But employees trusted him. Investors respected the consistency. Under his leadership, growth continued. Slower than Brennan's projections once promised, but solid and defensible. I stayed in my role as majority shareholder and structural lead. Quiet. Present. Involved. When the annual awards ceremony came around again, I almost didn't attend. But the board insisted. This time, the ballroom felt different. Less spectacle. More sincerity. When my name was announced for recognition in foundational leadership and long-term impact, I walked to the stage alone. The applause was steady. Not explosive. Not exaggerated. Just real. I accepted the award and stood at the microphone. For a moment, I looked out at the crowd, employees, investors, board members. Near the back of the room, I saw Brennan. He wasn't at a front table this time. He stood quietly along the wall, hands clasped in front of him. Still a shareholder. Still connected. But no longer the center of attention. I didn't feel anger when I saw him. Just distance. I spoke simply. When this company started, we had an idea and an empty warehouse. Growth is exciting. Vision matters. But foundations decide whether vision survives. The room was quiet. I've learned that leadership isn't about standing in the spotlight. It's about making sure the structure holds when the lights fade. I didn't mention Brennan. I didn't reference the past year. I didn't repeat his words from the previous ceremony. I didn't need to. When I stepped off the stage, Maricela met me halfway down the aisle. Her eyes were bright. "You looked calm," she said. "I am," I replied. Later that evening, as guests filtered out, Brennan approached me. "Congratulations," he said. His voice was steady, but softer than I remembered. "Thank you," I answered. There was a long pause between us. 12 years of history sitting in silence. "I underestimated you," he admitted finally. "No," I said gently. "You forgot what held everything up." He nodded once. No argument this time. We didn't shake hands dramatically. We didn't rebuild what was broken. Some partnerships don't return to what they were. But I walked out of that ballroom knowing something important. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Structure doesn't mean fear. And the person who writes the checks often decides who gets to keep the stage. That was never about revenge. It was about remembering my worth. And this time, no one laughed.